Wyatt Callahan hadn't spoken a word in 3 days when he rode into Caldwell Creek and saw a woman standing on an auction block in the middle of Main Street, hands bound chin up, eyes burning with a fury that had nowhere to go. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. He only knew that every man in that crowd was looking at her like she was something to be owned. Wyatt had seen cattle treated with more dignity. He swung down from his horse. If you feel that, drop a comment below. Tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because this is only the beginning. The summer of 1883 came to Caldwell Creek, Wyoming, like it always did. Hot and indifferent, baking the dust into the road until it cracked like old leather. The mountains to the north stood cool and remote, draped in pine and shadow, and from up there, if a man looked down at the town below, it would have seemed peaceful enough. A collection of wooden storefronts, a church with a crooked steeple, horses tied along a rail that needed replacing 2 seasons ago. But Wyatt Callahan wasn't looking at it from the mountains. He was riding into it, and what he saw wasn't peaceful at all. There was a crowd gathered in front of the Caldwell Creek Mercantile, maybe 60-70 people, and they were quiet, in the way crowds go quiet when something shameful is happening, and nobody wants to be the one to name it. Men in work shirts and suspenders. Women who had pulled their children close without quite knowing why. A handful of ranch hands leaning against the post office wall, arms folded, watching with the flat expression of men who had already decided something wasn't their business. And there, on a wooden platform that had been dragged out onto the street, stood Clara Harper. She was 25 years old, with a round face that the summer sun had touched to copper dark hair pinned back hard at the base of her neck, and a canvas dress that had been mended at the shoulder so many times the thread had turned a different color than the cloth. She was not a small woman. She was solid and strong and built for real work, and she stood on that platform with her hands bound at the wrist, with coarse rope, her chin lifted at an angle that suggested she had made a decision somewhere between the jail and the street that she was not going to let these people see her break. She wasn't breaking, but it was costing her everything she had. Standing beside the platform was Silas McBride. Wyatt had heard the name before he ever laid eyes on the man. You didn't spend time in Wyoming territory without hearing it. Silas McBride owned the Rafter M 40,000 acres of prime grazing land, 3-line camps, a contract with the territorial government for beef supply, and enough money behind him that the law tended to look in a different direction when his name came up. He was 52, heavy through the shoulders, with a gray beard trimmed close, and eyes the color of old iron. He wore a fine suit in the heat, which meant he was the kind of man who wanted you to know he didn't have to sweat. He had a piece of paper in one hand. He was holding it up like it was a deed to the world. "This here document," McBride was saying, as Wyatt pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the crowd, "is a lien signed by Thomas Harper. God rest him against the sum of $800 borrowed from the Rafter M account in the spring of 1881. Thomas Harper died in April of this year without having repaid a single cent of principal or interest, in the absence of liquid assets." He paused. Let the legal language sit in the air. "The lien transfers to collateral, which is the Harper homestead and all property therein, including the labor of any surviving dependent of working age." A man near Wyatt muttered something under his breath. Another man shushed him. "This is a labor contract." McBride continued, smooth as creek water over flat stone. "Miss Harper will work off the debt at fair wages, room board, and $2 a week at the Rafter M. Estimated time to settle the principal and interest, 4 years. 4 years. Wyatt sat on his horse and did the arithmetic. At $2 a week in 4 years, Clara Harper would have earned $416, not $800, not the interest. At that rate, she would never be free. He looked at Clara. She was staring at McBride with an expression that had moved past anger into something colder and more controlled, the face of a woman who understood exactly what was being done to her and was calculating whether there was any way out. There wasn't, not without help. Wyatt looked at the crowd. 60-70 people. Neighbors. People who had known Thomas Harper. People who had bought supplies from Clara's mother before she died, who had waved to Clara on the road, who had eaten at church socials where she'd brought cornbread and apple preserves. Not one of them was moving. He felt something shift in his chest. Not anger exactly, something older than anger. He dismounted. He was a big man, 6'2", 220 pounds of muscle, laid down by 10 years of mountain work, guiding hunting running freight through passes that killed weaker horses and weaker men. He had a face that the sun and wind had worked over hard, dark brown hair that he'd stopped cutting with any regularity, and eyes the color of winter ice, pale blue, sharp, the kind of eyes that made men feel like they'd said something that needed explaining. He had a scar that ran from his left jaw to the corner of his mouth, a souvenir from a mountain lion that had taught him respect, the only way mountain lions teach anything. He moved through the crowd, and people stepped aside without quite knowing why they were doing it. He walked to the base of the platform and looked up at McBride. "How much?" he said. The crowd went quieter, if that was possible. McBride looked at him. The iron-gray eyes moved over Wyatt the way a man looks at something he's trying to assess the danger of. "I don't believe we've met," McBride said. "Wyatt Callahan. I run freight and guide out of the Northern Range. How much is the debt?" "This isn't an auction, Mr. Callahan. This is a legal labor contract. You put a woman on a platform, and you're discussing the terms in public," Wyatt said. "That's an auction. How much is the debt interest included?" A murmur moved through the crowd. Someone coughed. McBride's jaw tightened just slightly, just enough for Wyatt to see it. $1,200, McBride said. "Principal plus 2 years of accumulated interest." Wyatt reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He set it on the edge of the platform. It landed with a weight that was unmistakable gold, not coin, the kind of weight that comes from a man who has spent years in country where the banks are 2 days' ride away, and you learn to carry your wealth on your person. "Count it," Wyatt said. McBride stared at the pouch. He didn't move. "I said count it." Wyatt repeated quieter this time, which somehow made it worse. "If it's 1,200, the debt's paid. If it's more, you can keep the difference. If you want to stand there and tell me a legal debt can't be settled in gold, say it loud enough for these folks to hear." The crowd was absolutely still. McBride picked up the pouch. He pulled it open. He looked inside, and whatever expression he'd been wearing, that smooth municipal certainty, slipped just for a moment. Then it came back rearranged into something harder. "This doesn't change the terms of the property lien," he said. "The homestead is a separate matter," Wyatt said. "One thing at a time. Cut her loose. Mr. Callahan, cut her loose." The deputy standing at the corner of the platform, a young man named Holt, barely 22, with the look of someone who had taken a job because it came with a badge and not because he'd thought through what the badge meant, stepped forward and cut the rope at Clara's wrists with a knife. He pulled from his belt. He looked relieved to have something to do. Clara brought her hands forward and looked at them. The rope had left red marks. She rubbed her wrists slowly, deliberately, and then she raised her eyes and looked at Wyatt. He expected relief, maybe gratitude. What he got was something entirely different. "I don't know you," she said. "No, ma'am. I didn't ask for this." "I know." "What do you want?" It was a fair question. In this world, in this territory, in this year, a man didn't lay down $1,200 in gold for a woman he'd never met without wanting something in return. Clara Harper had clearly learned that lesson early and was not going to pretend otherwise. "Right now," Wyatt said, "I want you off that platform." And after that, he looked at her. Really looked at her the way he hadn't allowed himself to do while McBride was talking, because doing it then would have made him angrier than was useful. She was exhausted. She'd been holding herself together by force of will for what looked like a very long time, and it was showing in the tight set of her mouth and the shadows under her eyes, and the way her hands, now that the rope was off, were trembling slightly. Not from fear, he thought, but from the effort of stopping herself from feeling fear. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. She studied him for a long moment. The crowd was watching. McBride was watching. "All right," Clara said. She's from the platform without taking the hand he hadn't offered. She landed steady on both feet, straightened her dress, and looked at the crowd with an expression that made several men look away. Then she looked at McBride. "You'll want to note," she said, her voice even, "that this debt was paid in full in front of witnesses. I'll be expecting a signed receipt before sundown." McBride's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened on the leather pouch, and Wyatt saw it. "You'll get your receipt," McBride said. He was looking at Wyatt when he said it, not at Clara. "And then we'll discuss the matter of the deed." Che. They walked to the far end of the street, Clara and Wyatt, while the crowd broke apart behind them in the murmuring, shoulder-bumping way of people processing something they hadn't expected. At the water trough near the livery, Clara stopped and pressed her still red wrists into the cool water and breathed. Wyatt stood beside his horse and gave her the silence. After a while, she said without turning around, "You know he's not done." "I know. The homestead. He'll come for it next. He's been trying to take our land for 3 years. The debt was just—" She stopped. "It was just the piece he needed." "How much land?" 320 acres. Good land up along the North Fork of Crow Creek. My father filed on it in '75. We built on it, improved it, proved it up. It's ours by law." She finally turned around. Her eyes were dry. "It was ours by law. McBride has a judge in his pocket in Laramie. He's been filing challenges to the patent for 2 years. Any gold on it?" She looked at him sharply. "Why does that matter?" "Because McBride doesn't need more grazing land. He has 40,000 acres. He doesn't need 320 more unless there's something on it worth having." The look on her face told him he was right before she said anything. "My father found color in the creek 3 summers ago," she said quietly. "He didn't tell anyone, or he thought he didn't. He filed a mining claim separately under my name." She looked down at her wrists. "He was trying to protect me. He thought if the claim was in my name and the homestead was in his, McBride couldn't get both." "But McBride found out." "McBride always finds out." Wyatt was quiet for a moment. He looked up the street at where McBride was still standing talking to a man in a dark coat, a lawyer by the look of him. McBride hadn't taken his eyes off them entirely. "You have somewhere to go?" Wyatt asked. "No." "Friends in town?" She gave him a look that said everything about what the town had just done. "Right," he said. "Then I'm going to tell you something and you can do with it what you want." He turned to face her fully. "I have a place up in the northern range. Cabin Water Supplies. It's a 1.5-day ride from here. McBride's men don't go up that high, the terrain's too rough, and they're not paid enough to manage it." He paused. "You'd be safe there while you figure out your next step." Clara looked at him for a long time. The kind of look that is measuring not just the words, but the man behind them. "Why?" she said. "You don't know me." "No." "You spent $1,200 on a stranger." "I did." "That's not—" She stopped. Started again. "Men don't do that. Not without something in return." "I know what it looks like," Wyatt said. "I'm not going to tell you to trust me, because you just met me, and trust takes time, and you're not a fool. What I'm going to tell you is that I saw what happened on that platform, and I couldn't ride past it, that's all. You can come with me, or you can stay here, but if you stay here, McBride's lawyer is going to have a court order before this week is out, and there won't be anything left to argue about." Clara looked back up the street. McBride and the lawyer were walking toward the land office now, walking with purpose. She turned back to Wyatt. "I need 30 minutes, she said. "I have things at my father's house. I'll get supplies. Meet me at the north end of town." She nodded. She started to turn away, then stopped. "Clara Harper," she said. "Wyatt Callahan." She nodded again, as if confirming something she'd already suspected, and walked away. She was back in 25 minutes, not 30. She had a canvas bag over her shoulder and a smaller bag at her hip, and she was walking the way she'd stood on that platform, straight-backed and deliberate, like every step was a decision she'd made in advance. She had changed into a different dress, practical brown canvas-laced boots, a wide-brimmed hat pulled against the afternoon sun. She stopped when she saw the horse he'd saddled for her. "That's not your extra horse," she said. "That's a good horse. I have more." "You're careful with the truth, Mr. Callahan." "I try to be." She looked at the horse, a sturdy gray mare, mountain-bred, sure-footed, and then she looked at Wyatt, and he could see her filing things away, categorizing him. He didn't blame her. In her position, it was the smart thing to do. She put her foot in the stirrup and swung up without help, and settled into the saddle like she'd been riding since before she could walk. Because she had been. Wyatt mounted his own horse. "One thing," Clara said. "Yes, ma'am." "I don't need rescuing. What happened today, I needed help. That's different." He looked at her. "I know the difference," he said. She studied his face one more moment. Then she touched her heels to the mare's sides and moved north. Wyatt followed. Behind them, down the length of Main Street, Silas McBride stood in the doorway of the land office and watched them ride away. His hand was loose at his side. His expression was the expression of a man who has encountered a delay, not a defeat. A man who has dealt with delays before. He went inside. The door closed, and Caldwell Creek went back to its hot, indifferent summer afternoon with its cracked earth streets and its crooked church steeple and its 60-some-odd people who had stood in silence on a day when silence was the same as a vote. They rode north for 3 hours before Clara spoke again. The town was long behind them. The road, if you could call it that, had narrowed to a trail then, to something less than a trail, a suggestion of a path through high summer grass and sage that Wyatt followed by memory rather than by sight. The mountains ahead were pulling closer, ridge by ridge, the pine-covered slopes coming down to meet the valley. The air was cooling as the afternoon stretched toward evening. "You said you run freight," Clara said. She was riding slightly behind him and to his right. "And guide. Hunting parties mostly. Men from back east who want a trophy and need someone who knows the country." "You do this work alone?" "Mostly." "No family?" He was quiet for a moment. "Not anymore." She didn't push it. He appreciated that. "How long have you been up in the northern range?" 7 years. "You like it up there?" He thought about it, genuinely considered the question rather than giving her an automatic answer. "It's honest country," he finally said. "It doesn't pretend to be anything it's not." Clara rode in silence for a moment. Then, "My father used to say something like that about Wyoming. He said the land doesn't lie to you. People lie to you. Banks lie to you. Courts lie to you." She paused. "He wasn't wrong." He wasn't. "He also trusted the wrong people," she said, and there was no self-pity in it, just the flat assessment of someone who had spent the months since her father's death understanding how the disaster had unfolded. McBride lent him the money as a favor. That's what he said, as a favor between neighbors. No written terms at first. Then there were written terms, but my father couldn't read well, and by the time I read the document... She stopped. The interest rate was 3 times what McBride said it was, and there was a clause, a collateral clause. Labor and property. Labor and property. She said it the way you say the name of something you've been trying not to look at for a long time. My father didn't know. I'm certain he didn't know. He would never... She stopped again. He would never have signed it if he'd understood. "I believe you," Wyatt said. She looked at him. "You don't know me well enough to believe me." "No, but I know men like McBride well enough to believe the story." A hawk circled overhead, drifting on the late afternoon thermal above the valley. The mountains were very close now, the trail beginning to pitch upward. "What do you know about the gold claim?" Wyatt asked. "Enough to know it's real. I've seen the color. My father wasn't a fool, he knew the difference between pyrite and the real thing. The creek runs year-round, fed from snowmelt. There's a seam somewhere up in the North Fork. We never had the equipment to work it properly, but..." She pulled in a breath. "It's there. And the claim is registered. filed in Cheyenne in 1881 under my name, Clara May Harper. I have the paper." She touched her hip. "It's in here. It never leaves me." Wyatt nodded. "That's why he moved when he did," Wyatt said. "Your father died in April. Probate would have cleared by summer. Once the homestead transferred to you, free and clear. McBride loses his leverage. You're an adult. You haven't borrowed anything from him. He can't touch the land without a legal challenge that might take years. So he called in the debt before probate settled." Clara was quiet for a long moment. "You figured that out quickly," she said. "I've seen similar before. Where? Different territory. Same kind of man." He paused. It didn't end well. She didn't ask for the details. He didn't offer them. The trail steepened. The horses picked their way carefully. The gray mare following Wyatt's brown gelding without being asked, which was a good sign she was a horse that paid attention. The pine smell deepened as they climbed. Below them, the valley was a carpet of summer green and gold, and the town of Caldwell Creek had disappeared, entirely swallowed by distance and terrain. "Mr. Callahan," Clara said. "Wyatt." A pause. "Wyatt, what happens next? Tonight we make camp about a mile up this ridge. Tomorrow we ride the rest of the way to the cabin. Once you're there and safe, we figure out what we do about McBride. And if he sends men after us." Wyatt looked up the trail ahead at the switchbacks, the narrow passages, the places where the terrain did the work that men would have to do in open country. "Let him," he said quietly. Clara studied the side of his face for a moment. Then she turned back to the trail ahead. Above them, the mountains waited cool and old, and entirely unconcerned with the ambitions of cattle barons or the suffering of women on auction platforms. Up there the rules were simpler. You worked or you didn't. You were honest or you died from the consequences of lying to yourself about what the country would allow. Wyatt had lived by those rules for 7 years. He was comfortable with them. What he was less comfortable with what he was doing, his level best not to examine too closely, was the fact that he had ridden into Caldwell Creek for a bag of flour and 2 pounds of coffee, and was now riding back out with $1,200 less in gold, and a woman who looked at him like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop, because in her experience, there was always another shoe. He owed her honesty about why he'd done it. He didn't quite have the words yet, but he had time, and the mountains were patient. They made camp on a narrow ledge of flat ground where the trail bent back on itself, sheltered on 3 sides by granite and pine. Wyatt built a fire, small and low habit, not caution though caution was part of it, and Clara sat across from it with her canvas bag pulled onto her lap and her hat off for the first time since they'd left town. Her hair came down when she pulled the pins. She didn't seem to notice or didn't care. She was looking into the fire with the expression of someone doing arithmetic that wasn't about numbers. Wyatt handed her a tin cup of coffee and sat back on his side of the fire without making a production of it. He'd learned a long time ago that people told you more when you weren't leaning toward them. She drank. She stared at the fire. The horses moved quietly in the dark behind them, and somewhere up the ridge an owl was going about its business with methodical patience. "My father's name was Thomas," she said eventually. "He came out from Ohio in 1871. He had $40 and a mule and an absolutely unreasonable amount of confidence." A sound came out of her that was almost a laugh. "He used to say Wyoming was the only place in America where a man could still make something from nothing. He believed that." "He wasn't entirely wrong," Wyatt said. "No, he just didn't account for men like McBride." She turned the cup in her hands. "McBride came to the house 6 months after my father died, sat at our table, drank our coffee, told me he was sorry for my loss and that he hated to bring up business at such a time, but—" She stopped. "But—" "Always a but. Always." She looked up. "He had the document with him, already drawn up, already notarized. He knew my father had borrowed from him. I knew that too. My father told me he wasn't hiding it, but the number on that paper was not the number my father told me. And the terms." She shook her head slowly. "I told him I needed time to consult a lawyer. He said I had 30 days. Did you find one?" "I found 2. The first one took one look at McBride's name on the document and told me he didn't handle that kind of case. The second one took $20 I didn't have and told me the document was technically legal and my best option was to negotiate directly with McBride. Her voice was flat and precise, the way voices get when they've rehearsed anger until it becomes something quieter and more permanent. So I tried. I went to McBride's ranch. I sat in his office. I offered him a payment plan, $12 a month, which was everything I could spare from the farm income. He smiled at me and said he appreciated my initiative, but the terms of the document were clear. Wyatt said nothing. She didn't need commentary. She needed to say it out loud to someone who would sit still and let it land. That was February, she said. By April, he had filed in the county court. By May, the deputy came to the house with a summons. She set the cup down carefully. I showed up to that court date. The judge, a man I'd never seen before, brought in from Laramie, spent 11 minutes on my case. 11 minutes, and then he ruled in McBride's favor on every point. She looked at Wyatt. His clerk was wearing a Rafter M brand on his vest. I saw it when he stood up. The fire popped. A log shifted. That's when I knew, Clara said quietly, that I was not going to win this the way honest people are supposed to win things. How were you planning to win it? Wyatt asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into the bag at her hip and pulled out a folded paper-thick official, the kind that had been handled many times and was beginning to soften at the creases. She held it up briefly, then put it back. That claim, she said, is registered in Cheyenne with the Federal Land Office, not the county court, not Laramie, federal. McBride can own every judge in Wyoming territory, but a federal mining claim requires a federal proceeding to challenge. She met his eyes. I just needed time, and someone couldn't give me that. He moved before you could get to Cheyenne. I was leaving next Tuesday, she said. I had the coach fare saved. I had a letter of introduction to a land attorney there. She pulled in a breath. I was 3 days and 1 stagecoach ticket away from being out of his reach. The fire was burning low. Wyatt fed it a piece of wood and watched the flame take hold. You still have the coach fare? He asked. Yes. And the letter? Yes. He nodded slowly. Then we haven't lost anything today. We've just changed the route. Clara looked at him across the fire for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted, not softening exactly, more like a single layer of the careful distance she'd been maintaining had become momentarily transparent. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? I don't know. Something with more... She seemed to search for the word. Conditions. I told you, no conditions. Men always have conditions. Some men, Wyatt said. Not all. She looked at him a moment longer. Then she lay down on her side, her bag under her head, her hat pulled over her face, and within 4 minutes he wasn't watching exactly, but he noticed she was asleep. The deep, motionless sleep of someone who has been awake for a very long time and has finally allowed themselves to stop. Wyatt sat by the fire and kept watch, and did not examine too closely the particular quality of the quiet that had settled around them. They were moving again before the sun cleared the ridge. Clara woke without being called, was on her feet and rolling her blanket before Wyatt had finished saddling the horses, and when he handed her a piece of cold cornbread for breakfast, she took it without comment and ate it in the saddle. She was not a woman who wasted time complaining about the absence of things. The trail climbed harder in the morning light. The mountains here were not gentle. They were the kind of terrain that required constant attention, where a horse that stopped paying attention could go down in a heartbeat and take its rider with it. Clara's mare was handling it well, picking her footing with care, and Clara was letting her do it, not overmanaging, not fighting the horse's instincts. Another thing he noticed and filed away. They were 2 hours into the morning when the trail crossed a narrow creek, running fast and cold, with snowmelt knee-deep on the horses, stones slick and unevenly placed, and the gray mare hesitated at the bank. Give her a moment, Wyatt said. He'd already crossed on the gelding and turned back to watch. She's fine, Clara said. She kept steady. Let the mare look, and then when the horse had satisfied herself, touched her heels in, and they crossed in 4 quick strides, the mare's hooves finding the stones with precision. They came up streaming water, and Clara didn't look the least bit triumphant about it, which somehow made it more impressive. "You ride well," Wyatt said. "My father taught me." She pushed wet hair back from her face where the crossing had sprayed her. He said a woman in Wyoming who couldn't ride was a woman who was dependent on someone else's schedule. He didn't have a high opinion of dependency. Sounds like a man worth knowing. He was. A pause. Just 2 words, but the weight in them was considerable. He was the best man I've ever known. Not perfect. He trusted too easily, and he hated confrontation, and he should have had a lawyer read that document before he ever signed it. She was looking at the trail ahead now. But he was good. He was genuinely, uncomplicatedly good. That's rarer than people admit. "It is," Wyatt agreed. They rode on. The trail narrowed and then opened again onto a high meadow summer grass, thick and green wildflowers running in patches of yellow and purple. The kind of open space that felt like a held breath after the closeness of the pine. The sky above was deeply blue, the kind of blue that only happens at altitude. Clara pulled her mare to a stop in the middle of it. She was looking at something on the far side of the meadow. Wyatt looked too. 2 riders, sitting still on their horses at the tree line, maybe 300 yards off, watching. Everything in his body went quiet the way it did before trouble. "Don't stop moving," he said low and even. "Just ride through. Don't look at them directly." "I'm looking directly at them," Clara said. "I know. Stop." She pulled her gaze away. They kept moving across the meadow at the same pace, not faster, not slower. The 2 riders didn't move, just watched. They reached the far tree line, and the trail bent into the pines, and as soon as the trees closed around them, Wyatt pulled his gelding around and looked back through the gap in the branches. The 2 riders were moving now, not after them, not yet moving back into the tree line on their side parallel to the meadow's edge. "McBride's men?" Clara asked. Her voice was steady. "Don't know yet. Could be range riders, could be hunters." He watched the far tree line. Nothing moved. "Could be someone sent ahead." He couldn't have known we'd come this way. "There are only 3 routes north from Caldwell Creek. A man who knows this country knows which ones a horse can manage in a day." He turned the gelding back to the trail. "We're going to pick up the pace. How far to your cabin?" 4 hours at this pace. 2.5 if we push." "Push," Clara said immediately. They pushed. The trail through the pines was steep and technical, demanding the kind of riding that left no room for conversation, and they covered it fast. Wyatt leading, reading the ground ahead, calling out obstacles over his shoulder in time for Clara to respond. She was right there with him, every step, matching pace, not falling behind, not hesitating at the hard sections. The gray mare was blowing hard on the climbs, but recovering well on the flats. An hour in on a switchback that offered a clear view back down the trail, Wyatt pulled up. 1 rider, maybe a mile below them. Coming up. Just 1. Which was either better than 2 or worse depending on what the 1 was. "He's following," Clara said. She was beside him looking back. No tremor in her voice. The face of a woman in an entirely familiar kind of fear. Not the wild, destabilizing kind, but the slow and patient kind that you learn to carry. "1 man doesn't take 2 people on this terrain," Wyatt said. "He's tracking us, reporting back. To McBride. To whoever sent him." He looked at the trail ahead, then back down. "I know a place about 40 minutes from here where the trail splits and the left fork looks like the main route, but dead ends against a cliff face. Anybody who doesn't know this country goes left." Clara looked at him. "And the right fork stays hidden until you're already past the junction. You'd have to know it was there." "Then let's use it." They rode. At the junction marked by nothing but a particular angle of light between 2 specific trees, Wyatt turned right and they vanished into the unmarked path, and behind them the main trail continued straight and obvious, leading precisely nowhere useful. He didn't know if it would work. but it bought time. The cabin came into view in the mid-afternoon, tucked against the base of a granite outcropping with a creek running 10 yards to the west, surrounded by mature pine on 3 sides, and open to the south, where a kitchen garden had been hacked out of the mountain soil through what had obviously been years of stubborn effort. It was not a romantic structure. It was a serious one, built for longevity, not appearance, with thick log walls and a roof that had been re-shingled at least twice, and a stone chimney that was wider than it needed to be, because a wide chimney in mountain winter was not an extravagance, but a survival decision. Clara looked at it as they rode in and said nothing for a moment. "It's solid," she finally said. "It is. You built it yourself." "Most of it. A man named Eli Cross helped me with the roof. He winters down in the valley now his knee went bad." He dismounted and began unsaddling the gelding. "There's a room at the back. It has a door with a bar on the inside." Clara swung down from the mare and looked at him. "That was the condition," she said. Not accusatory, just understanding. "That wasn't a condition," Wyatt said. "That was information." She held his gaze for a moment. Then something in her face that had been carefully locked shifted one notch. "All right," she said. She took the mare's reins and led her toward the small corral at the side of the cabin. "Show me where the water is and I'll see to the horses." "Creek's to the west, buckets on the hook by the corral gate." She found it without asking again. Wyatt went inside and built a fire in the stove and took stock of his provisions, and tried very hard not to think too carefully about the fact that for 7 years, this cabin had been a place where he came alone and left alone. And now there was someone unsaddling horses in his corral who knew the difference between pyrite and real gold, and had lost $20 to a useless lawyer, and nearly lost everything else to a corrupt judge, and who had not once in a day and a half of hard travel and real danger asked him to feel sorry for her. Atamag. Clara came in from the corral as the light was going amber through the south-facing window. She washed her hands at the basin, sat at the table, and looked at the map. Wyatt had spread out a hand-drawn thing, detailed enough to be useful, covering the northern range from Caldwell Creek to the territorial boundary. "Show me where we are," she said. He pointed. She studied it. Her finger moved to a spot northeast of the cabin, following a line that represented Crow Creek and its North Fork. "That's the Harper claim," she said. "Right there." He looked. The claim was maybe 8 miles from the cabin as the crow flew. More on horseback with the terrain. "McBride will know the claim's location," Wyatt said. "Yes." Her finger stayed on the map. "But he can't work it without the patent. And the patent's mine. And the patent challenge has to go through the Federal Land Office, which means Cheyenne," Wyatt said. "Which is where you were going." "Which is where I'm going," she corrected. Her jaw had a set to it. "This hasn't changed. It's just delayed." He sat down across from her. "McBride will have men on the Cheyenne Road." "Then I don't go by road." He looked at her. She looked back calm and certain, and he understood that she had not spent the last months of her life simply surviving. She had been planning, thinking, looking for angles. The trip to Cheyenne hadn't been a desperate last move. It had been a calculated one, and she had backups for the backups. "There's a freight route," Wyatt said slowly. "Goes east through the high passes, comes down into Laramie. From Laramie, you can get to Cheyenne on the train without touching any road McBride would think to watch." Clara looked at the map, traced the route with her finger, nodded. "How long?" 5 days. 6 if the weather doesn't cooperate." "Do you know the route?" He gave her a look. "Right," she said. "Of course you do." She sat back. "Then that's what we do. We'll need to give it a few days first. Let McBride think he's lost us. If we move too fast, he'll know we have a destination in mind." Clara absorbed this. He could see her calculating not just the time, but what the time cost, what it bought. "A few days," she said. "All right." She looked around the cabin, then really looked at it for the first time since they'd arrived, taking in the details. The rifle hanging above the door, the shelf of books weathered and well-read, the pair of elk antlers serving as a coat hook, the hand-drawn map on the wall even more detailed than the one on the table, A second map beside it, not of terrain, but of the sky star chart's constellation lines drawn in precise ink. She looked at the star charts for a long moment. 8 by stars, she said. Clouds come in. You lose the landmarks. Stars move predictably. My father did the same. She said it quietly, almost to herself. Then she stood up and moved to the shelf of books, ran one finger along the spines. You read. In winter, there's not much else. She pulled one out. A collection of Shakespeare, battered the spine, repaired with leather and twine. She opened it to the middle, read a few lines, put it back. Thomas Harper read Shakespeare, she said. He used to read it aloud to me when I was small. I couldn't understand half of it, but I liked the sound. What was his favorite? She turned to look at him. The amber light from the window was directly on her face now, and for just a moment she looked younger than 25. Or maybe not younger, but less armored. She'd been so tightly controlled for so long that a single unguarded moment made her look like a different person. The Tempest, she said. He said it was a story about a man who lost everything and had to build a whole world from scratch. A pause. He thought it was optimistic. Wyatt said nothing. He was watching her face. I used to think he was wrong, Clara said. I thought it was a story about a man who got very lucky in the end. She turned back to the shelf. I'm still not sure he was right, but I understand it better now. Outside, the wind was picking up along the ridge, a serious, purposeful sound, the mountain making its presence known. Wyatt listened to it and looked at the woman standing at his bookshelf, her canvas dress dusty from 2 days of hard trail, and her hair still loose from the previous night's unpinning. And he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time, and had not gone looking for, and did not entirely know what to do with. He stood up from the table. I'll start supper, he said. Clara picked up another book. I'll stay out of your way. You're not in my way. She looked at him over her shoulder. A different kind of look than any she'd given him before. Not assessing, not wary, not measuring. Just present. Here, in this cabin, with the wind coming off the ridge and the star charts on the wall. All right, she said. And she sat down in the chair by the window, with the book open in her lap, and the last of the afternoon light came in across her hands. Chapters. 3 days passed. Not easy days, and not quiet ones, the mountain saw to that. A thunderstorm rolled through on the second night and kept them inside by the stove, while lightning walked down the ridge in blue-white steps, and the cabin shook with thunder that seemed to come from inside the rock itself. Clara sat across the table from Wyatt with both hands wrapped around a cup and watched the light through the window, and did not flinch. You're not afraid of storms, he said. I grew up in a soddy, she said. In a bad year, the roof came in. You learn to rank your fears appropriately. He thought about that. What's at the top? She thought. Losing what my father built. Losing the only thing he left me. She looked at the window. McBride taking that land and finding the gold and getting everything while my father's grave is still settling. She said it without drama, just truth. And below that, she looked at him. Trusting wrong, she said simply. The thunder rolled again, and she held his gaze through it. On the third morning, he came in from checking the horses to find her outside the cabin door, standing perfectly still in the early light, listening. He stopped when he saw her face. Someone on the trail, she said. Her voice was very quiet. I heard a horse. One. Moving slow. Trying not to be heard. Wyatt was already moving to the door. He got the rifle from above the frame, checked it without thought, and stood at the corner of the cabin where the sightline covered the approach trail. They waited. 4 minutes that felt considerably longer, and then a horse appeared through the pines. Not a rafter M animal, not a working ranch horse, but a town horse, a bay gelding that had seen better decades, and on it sat Deputy Holt. The young deputy from Caldwell Creek. The one who had cut the rope from Clara's wrists. He rode in with his hands visible and his expression doing something complicated. Mr. Callahan, he said. Deputy, I'm not here in an official capacity. He said it fast, like something he'd rehearsed on the ride up. "I want you to know that. I came on my own time, my own horse." "What do you want?" Holt looked at Clara, then back at Wyatt. He pulled something from his coat, a folded paper, and held it out at arm's length. Wyatt crossed to him and took it without taking his eyes off the deputy's hands. Then he looked at the paper. It was a court order, signed 3 days ago in Caldwell Creek by a circuit judge. A different judge than Laramie, a local man, which meant McBride was pulling a different string. The order authorized the seizure of the Harper mining claim on the basis of a procedural challenge to the original filing, not the homestead. The claim. McBride wasn't going through the county court for the land. He was going straight for the gold. "He filed the same day you wrote out," Holt said. "Judge Abernathy signed it by supper time. I don't—" He stopped, started again. "I don't think it's right, what he's doing. I've thought that for a while. But I'm 22 years old, and I have a badge that McBride's money helped put there, and I didn't say anything when I should have." "Why are you saying it now?" Clara asked. Holt looked at her. He had the face of someone who has recently discovered his conscience is heavier than his paycheck. "Because you stood on that platform, and you didn't break," he said. "And I stood there, and I didn't move. And I've been thinking about that." He swallowed. "McBride's sending 8 men north day after tomorrow. He told the foreman they're rounding up strays. They're not rounding up strays." 8 men. Wyatt looked at the court order, looked at Holt, looked at Clara, who was looking at the paper in his hand with an expression of complete focused calm, the face of someone for whom this was not a surprise and who had already begun calculating. "Thank you," Wyatt said to Holt. The deputy nodded. He looked like he'd expected something more, absolution maybe, or at least argument, but he took the nod and turned his horse. "Deputy," Clara said. He stopped. "There's a land attorney in Cheyenne, a federal one. His name is Aldous Vane. If something happens to either of us, you tell him about this order. You tell him McBride went after a federal mining claim with a county court judge." She held Holt's eyes. "Will you do that?" A long pause. The young man's jaw worked. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I will." He rode back down the trail, and the pines took him. Wyatt looked at Clara. She was already looking at him. "Day after tomorrow," she said. "Yes." "Then we have 1 day to get ready." "Yes." She held out her hand for the court order. He gave it to her. She folded it and put it inside her bag next to the mining claim that had never left her since the day McBride had knocked on her door with coffee and condolences and a document full of lies. She looked up at the mountains around them, the high granite, the summer pines, the terrain that the Rafter M's hired men had never learned to read. "Show me the land," she said. "All of it. Every trail, every drop-off, every place a man on horseback can't follow." She looked at him with those dark, steady eyes. "If we're going to be here when they come, I want to know this ground the way you know it." Wyatt looked at her for a moment. 8 men, 2 days, and Clara Harper, standing in the morning light outside his cabin with a court order in her bag, and no fear on her face, and a plan already forming behind her eyes. "All right," he said. "Let's start." They spent the rest of that day on the mountain. Wyatt took her through every trail, the way a man teaches something he has learned the hard way, not lecturing, just moving, pointing, letting the ground speak for itself. This ledge here where the granite overhang creates a blind corner that a rider coming uphill can't see around until he's already committed. That draw there where the ground looks solid, but the soil over limestone shifts under a horse's weight and sends the animal sideways. The creek crossing 200 yards north of the cabin, the one that looks easy and isn't where the stones beneath the surface are angled wrong and a horse hitting it at speed will go down. Clara listened and watched and asked precise questions. Not many, but the right ones. Where does the trail from the eastern approach join this one? How long from the meadow we crossed to the cabin at a walk at a run? Where would a man on foot be more dangerous than a man on horseback? That last question told Wyatt something he tucked away carefully. By mid-afternoon, they were on the high ridge above the cabin, looking down at the full approach, all three viable routes, visible from that angle, spreading out below them like the fingers of an open hand. Wyatt had been up here 100 times. He had never thought to show it. 8 men, Clara said. She was studying the approaches the way she'd studied that map the first night, methodically, without sentiment. What are they likely to do? Split. 2 on the eastern trail to cut off retreat. 4 up the main trail to the cabin. 2 as rear guard at the meadow. So they expect us to run. They expect me to run. They probably think you're already gone. She looked at him. Why would they think that? Because McBride is a man who understands women the way he understands everything else. As assets to be acquired or liabilities to be managed. He sent men to retrieve you. He didn't send men prepared for a woman who knows this ground and intends to fight for it. Clara turned back to the view below them. A long silence. Then that's our advantage, she said. That's our advantage. Show me where you'd put a man if you wanted to hold the eastern trail. He showed her. She looked at it, climbed down to walk. The specific ground came back up. I can hold that, she said quietly. He looked at her. I can, she repeated. Not defiant. Certain in the way of someone who has assessed themselves honestly and arrived at an accurate number. You ever shot at a man? He asked. He asked it straight the way the question deserved. No, she said. Have you been? Yes. Did you mean to hit him? Yes. Did you? A pause. Yes. She absorbed that. I don't want to kill anyone, she said. I want them to leave. I want McBride to understand that this particular piece of ground costs more than it's worth to take. She met his eyes. Can we do that without killing? Maybe, he said honestly. If they're hired men who aren't paid enough to die for it. Hired men have a threshold. Once the cost exceeds the pay, they stop. He paused. The question is whether McBride sent men with a threshold or men with a personal stake. What's the difference? Hired men stop when it gets hard. Men with a personal stake keep coming. Clara looked back down the ridge. The afternoon light was moving fast, the shadows lengthening across the approaches below. We'll find out, she said. That night they worked. Wyatt had wire freight rope, actually the thin braided kind used for lashing loads strong enough to take a horse's leg if strung at the right height across the right stretch of trail. He had it because he was a man who hauled freight through mountains and kept everything that might be useful someday. He had enough for 2 runs across the eastern approach and 1 across the main trail at the point where the pines closed in on both sides and a rider couldn't easily go around. Clara cut the lengths with the hatchet from the woodpile precise and without waste while Wyatt strung them. She passed each length to him without being asked, which meant she had watched what he was doing and understood the pattern. They worked in near silence, communicating in the shorthand that develops between people doing a practical thing together in the dark. At the first wire crossing, Clara said, "High enough to take a rider at the chest or the horse at the knee. Which do you want?" He considered. "Horse at the knee. I want them on foot, not injured." She adjusted the height without comment. At the second crossing, strung across the eastern trail at the blind corner, Wyatt found her already on the far side, holding the anchor point against a pine, her back to the tree, both hands wrapped around the wire, waiting for him to finish the near side. She had judged the tension correctly without instruction. "You've done something like this before," he said. "My father used to run snare lines for rabbit. Same principle, different scale." A pause. "And different consequences." When they were finished, Wyatt walked each approach again in the dark, testing every anchor, checking every angle. Clara walked beside him, and didn't need the lantern he was carrying. She was using his movement as reference, and the starlight for the rest, which meant her eyes had adjusted, and she was trusting them. Another thing he filed away. The list of things that Clara Harper had quietly demonstrated competence at was becoming considerable. Back inside, she spread the map on the table, and they went over the positions one more time. "I'll be at the Eastern Trail," she said. It wasn't a question. "You'll have the rifle." He put his hand on the map on the blind corner. One shot over their heads when they hit the wire and the horses go sideways. Don't shoot a second time unless you have to. What will you do? Main trail, with the other wire and everything else. What is everything else? He looked at her. Do you trust me? A pause. Shorter than it would have been 3 days ago. Within limits, she said. Expanding limits. That was honest, and he appreciated it. Then trust me on the main trail, he said. I know that ground better than any man McBride could send. I have 7 years of knowing where every loose stone sits. She studied him for a moment. Then she nodded. They banked the stove and went to their respective rooms, and Wyatt lay on his back in the dark, and listened to the mountain, and thought about the fact that he had spent $1,200 to put himself in a situation where he was about to face 8 hired men on a narrow trail for land. He didn't own gold. He wouldn't see a cent of, and a woman he had known for 4 days. He tried to locate the regret in that, and couldn't find it. He went to sleep. The morning of the second day came clear and windless. That was the thing about the mountain that Wyatt had learned to read like a language when the wind stopped before a storm. It wasn't calm. It was tension. The kind that built in the rock and the air until something broke it. Clara was up before him. He found her outside in the gray pre-dawn light, sitting on the woodpile with a cup of coffee and the rifle across her knees, dry firing it slowly, getting the weight of it into her hands. He watched her work the mechanism, work it again. She had the deliberate focus of someone who understands that competence is not a gift, but a practice. He poured his own coffee and sat on the step. My father had one like it, she said without looking up. Shorter barrel. He let me carry it on the spring drives when we moved cattle to the high pasture. She worked the mechanism again. Coyotes. Different target. Same principle. She finally looked up. I'm not going to miss. He believed her. They ate a real breakfast, beans and salt pork, the last of the cornbread coffee, strong enough to stand a spoon in. Clara ate without self-consciousness, which he noticed only because it contrasted with something he'd seen in town women who treated eating in front of men as a performance with rules he'd never understood. She ate because she was hungry, and because she needed the fuel, and because there was work to be done. When she was done, she said, Tell me about the man, McBride, what he wants more than the gold. Wyatt looked at her. Why does that matter right now? Because if I understand what he wants, I understand what he'll do when this doesn't go the way he planned. The gold is the reason, but it's not the motive. She set her cup down. The motive is something else. He thought about it. Really thought about it. Control, he said finally. He doesn't need the money. He has money. What he needs is for the territory to work the way he's decided it should work. People in their right places, land in the right hands being his. He paused. A woman holding a federal mining claim on land he wants, and winning that breaks something in the picture he has of how the world is organized. Clara nodded slowly. So even if we hold them off today, he doesn't stop. No. He sends more men, or he finds another legal angle, or he... She stopped. Or he does something uglier, Wyatt said quietly. She looked at him directly. You're telling me this doesn't end here. I'm telling you today is necessary, but not sufficient. We hold this ground today. Then we get you to Cheyenne before he can regroup. He held her gaze. The federal land office is the end of this, not the 8 men on the trail. Clara was quiet for the moment. Then she stood up, picked up the rifle, and looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before. Not the assessment, not the careful measuring. Something that had arrived from a deeper and more dangerous place. Then let's make sure we get there, she said. They heard the horses at mid-morning. Not close still on the lower trail, maybe 40 minutes out, but the mountain carried sound in specific ways, and Wyatt had learned to read those ways. He held up his hand, and Clara stopped moving instantly, and they both listened. 8 horses, maybe 9. Moving at a pace that said confident, not cautious. Men who didn't think they were going to meet resistance. Good. Eastern Trail, said. Clara looked at him. For just a second, 1 second, something passed across her face. Not fear. Something more complicated than fear. The recognition that the next few hours were real, not a plan on a map. Then it was gone. She checked the rifle one more time. She looked at him. "Don't do anything stupid," she said. It was such an unexpected thing to say, so direct, so entirely without pretense, that he almost laughed. Almost. "Same to you," he said. She walked east into the pines, and the trees took her. Wyatt went to the main trail. He heard them before he saw them. 4 riders on the main approach, coming through the pines single file, because the trail demanded it, which was exactly what he'd counted on. Single file meant each man's field of vision was limited by the rider in front of him. Single file meant a problem at the front of the line stopped the whole line. He was 20 feet above the trail on a granite ledge that didn't look like a ledge from below, because the angle was wrong, and the pine branch he'd carefully not cleared gave it the appearance of just more mountain. He had the second rifle his own, the one he knew, and he had 3 things he'd prepared the night before that were not firearms and not wire, and not things a man usually brought to this kind of argument. The lead rider came around the bend in the trail and hit the wire at chest height. Not at a gallop, they weren't moving fast enough for that, but fast enough. The wire caught him across the chest, and the horse kept moving forward, and the rider went back and sideways and hit the ground with a sound that was loud and solid and involuntary, the sound of a man meeting the earth at a speed he didn't choose. The horse behind him pulled up hard. The rider on that horse had 1 second to understand what had happened before Wyatt dropped the first of his 3 prepared items from the ledge. A clay pot of creek water mixed with pine pitch, which shattered on the trail below with a sound like a small explosion, and a smell that hit the horses immediately. Both animals went sideways. The 3rd and 4th riders, coming around the bend with no warning, found themselves in a chaos of rearing horses and a man on the ground and a smell that every horse on earth is programmed to treat as danger. Wyatt was already moving along the ledge to his second position. "McBride's order don't apply up here." He said it loud and level from above and to their right, which meant they couldn't find him by sound. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere on the granite. "You're on private land. The man who sent you is looking at a federal court challenge that will bury the Rafter M in litigation for 10 years. You can ride down the mountain right now, and that's the end of it for every one of you." The man on the ground, the lead rider, was getting up. He was not hurt badly, just shaken, the kind of shaken that makes a man angry before it makes him careful. "There's 2 of them," the man on the ground said. Foreman said 2, man and a woman. Foreman was right, Wyatt said from a different position now, 3 steps to the left along the ledge. "And one of those 2 just took your lead rider off his horse without firing a shot. Think about what the next 10 minutes look like. A pause in the chaos below." Wyatt watched the calculation happen in real time. He could see it in the set of the rider's shoulders, the way the man on the ground stopped moving toward his horse and stood still instead. These were hired men. Ranch hands probably pulled off normal work for a job that paid extra. They were not killers. They were men who had been told this would be simple. "We got orders," the man on the ground said. But his voice had a different texture now, less certain. "Orders from a man who is going to federal court for claim jumping," Wyatt said. "When that happens, and it will happen, every man who was on this mountain today becomes a material witness. You want to be a witness for McBride or against him. A beat. Think fast. I've got all day, and you've got horses that aren't going to settle." From the east, 1 shot. A single crack. Clara's rifle firing high, the sound rolling off the granite and multiplying, and then voices, men's voices, sharp with surprise, and the sound of at least 1 horse moving fast and wrong through the underbrush. The wire on the eastern trail had done its work. The 4 men below Wyatt looked east. Then they looked up at the place they thought he was, which was not where he was. The man on the ground picked up his hat from where it had fallen. He looked at the trail ahead at the cabin they couldn't see yet, at the terrain they didn't know, at the mountain that had already taken their lead rider off his horse without firing a shot, and made them deaf to where the shooter was standing. He looked at the man next to him. "I ain't paid enough," he said. It was the simplest and most honest thing Wyatt had heard in a long time. 2 of the 4 riders turned their horses around before the sentence was finished. The man on the ground remounted. The 4th rider hesitated younger, with something to prove, and Wyatt dropped the second clay pot 10 feet in front of the man's horse. The horse made its decision for him. They went down the trail. All 4 of them. Not fast men who have been embarrassed don't run. They withdraw with a dignity they haven't earned, but they went. Wyatt stayed on the ledge and watched them go and listened east. The eastern trail had gone quiet. Too quiet. He was off the ledge and moving east before he'd finished the thought. He found her at the blind corner, standing with her back to the granite outcropping, the rifle in both hands, at a downward angle. At her feet was the wire which had been cut. Not by her. 20 yards down the eastern trail, 2 riders were sitting on their horses. Not retreating. Not advancing. Sitting. Between them and Clara, standing on foot in the trail with his hands loose at his sides and an expression of complete confident stillness, was a man Wyatt had never seen before. He was maybe 45, lean, with a face the weather had worked on considerably. He wore a duster and a hat pulled low, and he was not carrying his rifle. It was in the scabbard on the horse he'd clearly dismounted from, which was standing 10 feet back up the trail. He had a pistol on his hip, holstered. He had made a point of not reaching for it. He had also made a point of cutting the wire. He looked at Wyatt when Wyatt came out of the pines. "Callahan," he said. Not a greeting, a recognition. Wyatt stopped. He looked at the man. He looked at Clara, who gave him a tight, controlled look that said she was fine, and also that she was waiting for him to explain this. "Drummond," Wyatt said. The name landed in his own mouth like something that had been waiting there for a long time. Clara looked between them. "You know him?" "Yes," Wyatt said. "Then perhaps," Drummond said pleasantly, "you'd like to tell the young lady that I'm not here on McBride's behalf." "Then whose?" Clara said. She hadn't moved the rifle. Drummond reached very slowly into his duster and produced a folded paper. He held it out at arm's length. When neither of them moved, he set it carefully on a flat rock at the edge of the trail. "Federal Land Office," he said. "Cheyenne, I've been looking for you for 6 days, Miss Harper. You're not easy to find." He paused. "That's a compliment." Clara looked at the paper on the rock. She didn't move toward it. "Why?" she said. "Because the challenge McBride filed against your claim the county court order was reviewed by a federal magistrate in Cheyenne 4 days ago. It was dismissed." He said it simply, without flourish. A county court has no jurisdiction over a federal mining claim. McBride's lawyer knew that. The judge who signed it knew that. The dismissal also includes a referral to the Territorial Attorney General for judicial misconduct. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Clara's hands on the rifle did not move. Her face did not move. But something behind her eyes changed. Something that had been drawn very tight for a very long time encountered the possibility of release and did not know yet whether to trust it. "That's not the end," she said. Her voice was steady. "He can refile. He can find another angle." "He can try," Drummond said. "But the referral to the Attorney General changes his situation considerably. Men with that kind of scrutiny on them tend to discover that certain projects aren't worth the attention." He looked at her with the frank, undeceiving gaze of a man who deals in facts. "I won't tell you it's over, but I will tell you that the ground shifted under McBride today, and he doesn't know it yet." Wyatt was watching Clara. She lowered the rifle, slowly, all the way down. She held it at her side, and she looked at the paper on the rock, and she breathed once the kind of breath that you take when you have been holding something for a very long time and have finally been given permission to set it down. Then she walked to the rock and picked up the paper. She read it. Every word. The 2 riders at the end of the trail watched her read it. Drummond watched her read it. Wyatt watched her read it. When she finished, she folded it carefully along the original creases and put it in the bag at her hip, next to the mining claim, next to the letter of introduction to the attorney in Cheyenne. She Wyatt. He still sent 8 men this morning, she said. He didn't know yet, Drummond said. The dismissal was filed yesterday afternoon. He'll know by tonight. Yes. And then, Drummond looked at the trail behind him, at the 2 riders who were men of his own federal, not Rafter M, which explained why they hadn't engaged on the trail, and then back at Clara. Then, he said, we make sure you get to Cheyenne. There are additional documents you need to file in person. Confirmation of the claim and affidavit about the county court action. He paused. And Miss Harper, the Attorney General's office, is going to want to talk to you. Clara stood very still. About McBride, she said. About everything, Drummond said. The lien, the judge in Laramie, the county court order, everything you know, everything your father knew. He met her eyes. You're not just a woman with a mining claim anymore. You're a witness. The thing that passed across Clara Harper's face in that moment was not triumph. It was something older and more complicated, the expression of a person who has been fighting alone for so long that the arrival of allies feels like a different kind of danger, because now there is something to lose that you didn't let yourself believe in before. She turned to Wyatt. He was looking at her. He had been looking at her. You knew, she said, not accusing, just understanding. I knew Drummond works federal land, Wyatt said. I didn't know he was looking for you. I didn't know about the dismissal. He paused. But I knew McBride had pushed hard enough against federal jurisdiction that someone in Cheyenne was going to push back eventually. You could have told me. I didn't know enough to tell you anything useful. I knew the shape of it, not the details. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at the bag at her hip, at the invisible weight of the documents inside it, the claim and the letter, and now the dismissal, the entire paper, architecture of a fight her father had started, and she had continued, and that was now possibly beginning to lean in her direction. All right, she said finally. She looked at Drummond. When do we leave for Cheyenne? Tomorrow morning, he said. Tonight we... He stopped. They all stopped. Because from down the main trail from the direction the 4 riders had retreated, the direction that led back to the meadow and the lower approaches, and eventually to Caldwell Creek, came the sound of a single horse moving fast. Too fast for the terrain. The kind of speed that means whoever is riding doesn't care about the risk. Drummond's hand went to his pistol still holstered. Wyatt had his rifle up before the thought was complete. The horse came through the pines, and it was Deputy Holt, and the look on his face was not the uncomfortable conscience of a young man working through a moral reckoning. It was the face of someone who has ridden very hard to deliver something they wish they didn't have to say. He pulled the bay to a stop and looked at Wyatt and Clara, and his eyes went immediately to Drummond and the 2 federal riders, and something in his expression collapsed with relief. McBride knows about the dismissal, he said. He was out of breath. His lawyer telegraphed from Laramie an hour ago. McBride... He stopped, swallowed. He's not sending more men. Then what is he doing? Clara said. Holt looked at her. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on the mountain. He filed an emergency injunction this morning, before the dismissal came through before he knew. But it's in the system now, and his lawyer says it creates a hold on all activity related to the claim, including you traveling to Cheyenne to file. He looked at Drummond. Can he do that? Drummond's jaw had gone tight. He looked at the ground. He looked at Clara. An emergency injunction filed before a dismissal is recorded creates a procedural question, he said carefully. It doesn't stop you, but it means that anything you file in Cheyenne will immediately be challenged. His lawyer will argue that the timeline gives the injunction priority. He paused. It's not a good argument. But it takes time to defeat a bad argument. Weeks, maybe months. Clara was looking at him with the flat, clear-eyed gaze of a woman receiving information she has been braced for. So we're back to where we were, she said. Not entirely, Drummond said, but close enough. The mountain was very quiet around them. The summer pines moved slightly in a wind that had come up from the south. Below, somewhere on the lower trail, McBride's hired men were making their way back to the valley, and in Caldwell Creek, a telegraph line connected a ruthless man to a lawyer who knew every procedural trick that money could buy. Clara looked at Wyatt. He looked back at her. "What do we do?" she said. And it was the first time, the absolute first time, that she had asked that question of him directly, without qualification, without the careful maintenance of distance. Just the question, open and genuine, one person to another. Wyatt thought about the injunction. He thought about the timeline. He thought about what he knew about the federal land office in Cheyenne, and what he knew about Drummond, and what he knew about the specific geography between this mountain and that city. He thought about a woman standing on a platform, with her hands bound, and her chin up, and her eyes burning. "There's a federal judge in Laramie," he said slowly. "Not McBride's judge, a different one. Circuit Court, federal jurisdiction." He looked at Drummond. "If we get to him before McBride's lawyer does, before the injunction is formally served." Drummond caught it. He was already nodding. "A federal judge can issue a counter-order," Drummond said. "Supersedes the injunction, clears the path to Cheyenne." He looked at his two riders, then at Holt, then at Wyatt. "Laramie is 2 days from here." "Day and a half," Wyatt said, "if we don't stop. The injunction will be formally served within—" Drummond checked the sky, calculating. 36 hours, maybe less. Clara was already looking at the horses. She turned back to the group. She looked at each of them in turn, Drummond, his two riders, Holt, Wyatt. She looked at all of them with the focused, unillusioned assessment of someone who has learned to make decisions under conditions that do not wait for certainty. "Then we leave now," she said. "Not tomorrow morning. Now." Nobody argued. Wyatt went to get the horses. They rode hard out of the mountains with the afternoon sun already past its peak and the shadows starting to pull long across the trail. Drummond set the pace faster than comfortable, slower than reckless, and his two federal riders flanked the group with the practiced efficiency of men who had done this kind of work before. Holt rode at the back quieter than he'd been on the approach, processing something. Wyatt rode beside Clara and watched the trail ahead and did the arithmetic in his head the way he'd been doing it since she said the word now. 36 hours to serve the injunction. Day and a half to Laramie. The margin was not comfortable. It was the kind of margin that punished stops and rewarded decisions made in advance. "The Eastern Pass," Wyatt said to Drummond, pulling up beside him. "Saves 4 hours over the valley route." Drummond looked at the sky. "Weather." "Clear through tomorrow. I'd know." Drummond considered for exactly 3 seconds. "Eastern Pass." They turned east. Clara came up beside Wyatt on the gray mare, who had been moving well all afternoon, ears forward, willing. "How bad is the pass?" "Technical. Not dangerous if you know it." "And if you don't?" "Then it's dangerous," he said. "But I know it." She nodded and dropped back into line, and that was the end of the conversation. This was something he had come to appreciate about her. In 5 days she asked what she needed to know, and then she trusted the answer and moved on. There was no performance in her, no theater of helplessness, no drama manufactured to fill silence. She was simply and entirely present in whatever the current situation demanded. It made her easy to work beside. It made her other things, too. Things he was keeping in a separate part of his mind where they wouldn't complicate the next 36 hours. They hit the first problem 2 hours out of the mountains. The Eastern Pass approach crossed a flat stretch of open ground, half a mile of it, exposed the kind of exposure that a man watching from the right ridge could observe clearly. And it was there that Drummond's lead rider pulled up with his hand raised. 3 horses at the far edge of the flat, riders sitting still. "McBride's," Clara said. Her voice was level. "Can't know from here," Drummond said. Wyatt looked at the riders. The way they were positioned, not moving, not approaching, just present, had the specific quality of men who had been told to watch, not to act. A blocking position. They'd been sent ahead on a faster route. "He anticipated the Eastern Pass," Wyatt said. Drummond looked at him. You said he didn't know this country. His men don't, but McBride's been in Wyoming territory for 20 years. Wyatt kept his eyes on the three riders. He knows the passes. He just doesn't ride them himself. Can we go around? Adds 3 hours. We don't. Clara had been looking at the three riders with the same focused stillness she'd brought to the approach trail that morning. They're not moving, she said. If they were going to stop us, they'd have come forward. They're waiting for more men, Drummond's lead rider said. Or they're waiting to see what we do, Clara said. She turned to Wyatt. If we go around, we confirm we're trying to avoid them. If we go through and they decide to act, we're in open ground with no cover, Wyatt said. Drummond, Clara said. You have federal credentials. I do? Can you serve notice on them that they're interfering with a federal matter? Drummond looked at her, a slow beat of genuine consideration. I can make that argument. Then make it, she said, from a distance, loud. Drummond looked at the three riders. He looked at Wyatt. He reached into his duster and produced a folded document official, sealed the kind with the Federal Land Office stamp that was visible from 20 feet. He held it up so the sun caught it. Then he rode forward alone. Wyatt kept his rifle across his saddle and watched. Drummond rode to the center of the flat and stopped. He called something across the distance too far for the words to carry clearly, but the tone carried fine. The authority in it. The flat, unimpressed certainty of a federal officer who has done this before and is not particularly moved by the opposition. One of the three riders leaned and said something to the others. A long moment. Then all three turned and rode south away from the pass and didn't look back. Drummond came back at a walk. What did you say? Holt asked. I told them they were being observed by federal officers in the conduct of a matter before the circuit court, and that any interference would be documented and included in the current referral to the Attorney General. He put the document back in his coat. I also told them McBride's lawyer already knew the injunction was going to fail, and that any man associated with Rafter M., who appeared in federal testimony as an obstructor rather than a witness, was looking at personal liability. Was any of that true? Clara said. The first part, Drummond said. He touched his horse forward. The second part was a reasonable prediction. They rode through. The pass itself was everything Wyatt had promised. Technical, demanding, beautiful, in the way that dangerous things sometimes are, and they moved through it in a single-file silence that had its own quality of held breath. The horses worked hard on the switchbacks. Wyatt led, reading the ground, calling back adjustments, and Clara followed directly behind him and matched every call without hesitation, which meant she was watching his horse's feet as well as the trail ahead. Good riding. Mountain riding. Halfway through on the exposed saddle where the wind came in hard from the north and the view opened out to a vast sweep of territory in every direction, Drummond pulled up beside Wyatt for a moment. How long have you known her? He said quietly. 5 days. Drummond looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man doing a different kind of arithmetic. Then he said nothing more and rode on. They came down out of the pass in the last of the usable light and made camp at the base in a hollow that blocked the wind and hid the fire from any approach, except the one they'd come down. Wyatt had used this spot before. He knew its geometry the way he knew his own hands. Clara sat beside the fire and went through her bag methodically, checking the documents, checking the order of them, refolding each one along its original crease. The mining claim. The letter of introduction. The federal dismissal. She handled each one with the care of a person who has learned that documents are the only thing standing between her and a man with 40,000 acres and a judge on retainer. Holt was watching her from across the fire. He had the look of a man who has been chewing on something all day and has finally decided to say it. Miss Harper, he said. She looked up. I want to apologize, he said, for what happened in town. For not... He stopped. I had a job to do, and I told myself that meant staying out of it, but that was wrong. I knew it was wrong and I didn't move. Clara looked at him for a long moment. The fire was between them, and it made her expression difficult to read, but her voice when she spoke was neither harsh nor particularly gentle. It was honest. "You came up the mountain," she said. "You didn't have to do that." "It wasn't enough." "No," she agreed. "It wasn't, but it was something." She looked back down at the documents in her hands. "The men who did nothing and kept doing nothing, those are the ones I can't forgive. The ones who figure out they were wrong and try to do better, that's a different category." She folded the dismissal paper. "You're in the second category, Deputy. Don't waste it." Holt nodded. He stared at the fire. Drummond caught Wyatt's eye from across the camp and gave him a look that communicated without any words. Something along the lines of, "She's something else." Wyatt looked away before he agreed too visibly. They were moving before dawn. The last section of Trail to Laramie ran through open valley country, easier terrain, faster pace, but exposed in ways the mountain wasn't. They pushed the horses harder than Wyatt liked, but the horses were mountain-bred, and the morning was cool, and they managed. 3 hours out of camp, Drummond's lead rider came back from a quarter-mile ahead with his face tight. "Rider coming fast from the south," he said. "One man, moving like he has somewhere to be." They pulled off the trail into a shallow draw and waited. The rider came at a gallop and pulled up when he saw them, not afraid, just surprised. He was young, maybe 19 in town clothes, with the look of someone who had ridden through the night and wasn't finished yet. He looked at the group. His eyes stopped on Drummond's federal badge. "Thank God," he said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a telegram. "I've been riding since 3 in the morning. McBride's lawyer filed in Laramie this morning. Emergency hearing at the circuit court 9 o'clock. Wyatt looked at the sun. Maybe 7:30. 2.5 hours out of Laramie at their current pace. "Who sent you?" Drummond said. "Judge Alderman's clerk," the young man said. "The judge, he got the filing last night, and he asked his clerk to find out if there was a federal party traveling on this matter. Someone told him about you." He looked at Drummond. "He's holding the hearing open, but he can't hold it past 9 without McBride's lawyer calling it a prejudicial delay." Clara had been listening with her hands still on the reins and her face arranged in the particular way it arranged itself when she was doing rapid calculation. "Can we make it?" she said to Wyatt. He was already looking at the terrain ahead. "If we go now and we don't stop." "Then go," she said. They went. Dad, the last 2 hours were the hardest riding of the trip. Not technically, but in the way that urgency is its own kind of terrain, making every small delay feel catastrophic and every clear stretch feel insufficient. They pushed through a creek crossing that soaked everyone to the knee, and nobody mentioned it. They took a shortcut through a rancher's hayfield that Wyatt knew from a freight run 3 years ago, and that shaved 20 minutes off the road route. Drummond's second rider's horse threw a shoe on a gravel stretch, and the rider switched to riding double with Holt, which slowed that pair but kept them moving. Clara rode like the next hour was the only thing in the world. Wyatt watched her ahead of him on the gray mare and thought about what Drummond had asked at the pass. 5 days, that was all. 5 days, and he knew her in the way that you know terrain you've covered under pressure. Not every feature, but the essential shape of it. The places where it was solid, and the places where it was not, and above all, the direction it naturally ran. She ran toward the thing, not away from it. That was the essential fact about Clara Harper. Every difficult thing she had encountered, she had turned and faced directly. The platform, the mountain, the 8 men on the trail, the injunction. Now this. He had known men who rode into dangerous country for 20 years and never developed that quality. She'd been born with it, or built it out of necessity, or both, and either way, it was more purely itself for not being performed. He needed to stop thinking about it. He focused on the trail. Laramie came into view at 8:47 by Drummond's watch. They rode down the main street at a pace that made people step back from the boardwalk, and children stopped to point 6 riders covered in trail dust and creek water and the specific dishevelment of people who have been moving without rest for reasons that matter. The courthouse was a brick building on the corner of 2nd and Main. Drummond was off his horse before it fully stopped, and Clara was right behind him, and Wyatt tied both horses to the rail and followed them up the steps without being asked. McBride's lawyer was already inside. Wyatt saw him through the door, a compact man in an expensive suit, silver-haired, with the calm of someone who wins by controlling the room before anyone else arrives. He was talking to a clerk. He looked up when Drummond walked in. Something crossed his face. Very briefly. Then the professional mask came back. "Agent Drummond," he said. "Counselor Prentice," Drummond said. Judge Alderman was at the bench, a tall man, 60 or so, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the air of someone who had seen most of what the territorial court system could produce, and was not easily impressed by any of it. He looked at the group that had just walked into his courtroom with a measuring eye. "You made it," he said. Not warmly, not coldly, simply. "We made it," Drummond said. "Then let's proceed." He looked at Prentice. "Counselor, you have your emergency injunction application on record. The federal agent has the dismissal order from Cheyenne. Miss Harper is present." He folded his hands on the bench. "I've read both documents this morning. I have questions for both sides. We'll start with the timeline." Prentice was already on his feet. "Your Honor, the injunction was filed at 7:43 this morning prior to—" "I know when it was filed," the judge said. "Sit down, Counselor." Prentice sat. Clara had taken a chair at the table to the left. She sat straight, hands folded in her lap, the canvas bag on the table in front of her, with the documents inside it. She looked at the judge with the same direct, undeceiving attention she gave everything that mattered. The judge looked at her. "Miss Harper," he said, "the mining claim in question, filed in your name in 1881 with the Federal Land Office in Cheyenne. Can you confirm you are in possession of the original filing document?" "Yes, Your Honor." She opened the bag and produced the claim. She handed it to the clerk without being asked. The judge examined it. He passed it to the clerk. He looked at Prentice. "The county court order your client obtained," he said. "Issued by Judge Whitmore in Caldwell Creek. You're aware that Judge Whitmore is currently under review by the Territorial Attorney General's office." Prentice paused, a very precise pause. "I was made aware of that this morning, Your Honor." "Were you aware of it when you filed in his court?" Another pause, longer. "I was aware of certain allegations," Prentice said carefully. The judge looked at his papers. "The federal dismissal of the county court order is dated yesterday. Your injunction application is dated this morning. You are asking me to treat a document filed after a federal dismissal as having priority over that dismissal, on the basis of timing within the procedural, Counselor." The judge's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I've been on this bench for 14 years. I know what you're doing, and I know why you're doing it, and I will tell you plainly that the argument you're about to make would require me to hold that a county court order supersedes a federal dismissal, which is not something this court or any court is going to do." He looked at Prentice over his glasses. "Is there another argument you'd like to make instead?" The room was very quiet. Wyatt was standing at the back of the courtroom. He was watching Clara. She was very still, hands folded, looking at the judge. He could see her breathing slow and controlled the breathing of someone managing themselves with deliberate care. Prentice shuffled his papers. He looked at them the way a man looks at cards that aren't going to improve. "Your Honor," he said, "my client has a significant financial interest in the property adjacent to the Harper claim. The challenge to the claim is based on what we believe are procedural deficiencies in the original 1881 filing, which is a matter for the Federal Land Office in Cheyenne," the judge said, "not for this court, and certainly not for a county court in Caldwell Creek." He set his papers down. "The emergency injunction application is denied. The county court order issued by Judge Whitmore is hereby recognized as dismissed per the federal ruling." He looked at Clara directly. "Miss Harper, you are free to proceed to Cheyenne to complete your filings. This court recommends you do so promptly. Clara looked at him. "Yes, Your Honor, thank you." "Don't thank me. This is what the law is supposed to do." He looked at Prentice. "Counselor, your client should be aware that this court has seen the referral to the Attorney General. Any further filings related to the Harper claim in any non-federal jurisdiction will be reviewed with that referral in mind." A pause. "We're adjourned." He stood. The clerk said, "All rise." Everyone in the room rose, and then it was over. Just like that, not with fanfare, not with the catharsis that the weight of it seemed to demand, but with the quiet procedural finality of a judge standing up from a bench in a brick courthouse in Laramie, Wyoming, on a Tuesday morning in the summer of 1883. Prentice gathered his papers without looking at anyone and left through the side door. Clara stood at the table. She didn't move for a moment. She picked up her bag and held it against her chest with both hands, and she stood in the middle of the courtroom in her trail-dusty canvas dress with her hair coming down from 2 days of hard riding, and she breathed. Drummond put a hand briefly on her shoulder as he passed no words, just contact the acknowledgement of one professional to another, and went to speak with the judge's clerk. Holt was in the doorway, hat in his hands, looking at her with something that was going to take him a long time to work through. Wyatt walked forward from the back of the room. He stopped in front of her. She looked up at him, and the thing behind her eyes was not triumph. He had expected triumph. What he saw instead was exhaustion, the deep cellular exhaustion of someone who has been holding a structure together through force of will for so long that the moment the external pressure eases, the internal cost becomes visible. Her jaw was working slightly, just slightly. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. And then, more honestly, "I will be." "That's a better answer." She looked down at the bag in her hands. "It's not over," she said. "Cheyenne, the filings, whatever McBride tries next." "No, not over. He's going to come back at this from another angle. Men like him don't just stop. They don't." Wyatt agreed. "But you've got federal documentation, a dismissed county order, an attorney general referral, and a circuit court denial of the injunction. Every angle he tries now runs into one of those." He paused. "The ground shifted under him today like Drummond said. This morning it shifted again. At some point, even McBride does the arithmetic." She looked at him. Something in her face was doing the specific calculation of a person deciding whether they are allowed to believe something good. "Do you actually think that?" she said. "Or are you saying it because I need to hear it?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Both," he said. "But mostly the first." She held his eyes for a moment. Then she did something he hadn't seen her do once in 5 days. She let her shoulders drop. Not dramatically, just the specific release of 2 inches of held tension, a body allowing itself to acknowledge a weight. "I need to sit down," she said. "There's a bench outside." "I know there's a bench outside. I was in the building before you." "That's true," he said. They went outside. The bench was in the morning sun, and it was warm, and the street was going about its ordinary business around them. Wagons, horses. 2 women with market baskets. A dog asleep in a patch of shade. The perfectly ordinary activity of a town that had not been aware that morning of what was happening in the brick courthouse on the corner. Clara sat and put the bag on her knees and looked at the street. Wyatt sat beside her. Not close. Appropriate. After a while she said, "My father would have liked you." He didn't know what to do with that, so he said, "Why?" "Because you do what you think is right without explaining it to death." She looked at the street. He was like that. He didn't talk about the kind of man he was. He just was it. A pause. "And because he would have recognized that you're carrying something. He always knew. He had a way of looking at people and seeing what they were holding on to." She glanced at him sideways. "I have the same way." "I know you do," Wyatt said. "Then you know I've been looking." "I know. And I know there's something there. I just don't know what it is." He was quiet. Across the street a horse was being shod at the farrier's, the ring of the hammer regular and patient. "My wife died," he said. 4 years ago. Fever in the winter. I was 3 days out on a freight run, and I came back and she was already." He stopped. "I built the cabin for her. She died before it was finished." Clara was very still beside him. "The room with the bar on the inside," she said quietly. "Her room. She designed it. She wanted—" He stopped again. "She was particular. She said a woman should have a room that was entirely her own." She was right. She usually was. A silence. The hammer rang at the farrier's. The dog in the patch of shade shifted and settled. "What was her name?" Clara said. "Margaret," he said. "Maggie. She sounds like someone worth knowing." "She was the best person I've ever known," he said. And then, hearing his own words, he looked at Clara. Because she had said the exact same thing about her father. Word for word. She had heard it too. She looked at him with a particular expression, not pity, and not the careful measuring she'd given him before, but something that had arrived at a quieter and more undefended level. "I think," she said slowly, "that we are possibly two of the most stubborn people in Wyoming territory." "Almost certainly," he said. "That's either a disaster or a foundation." He looked at her. "Which do you think?" She was quiet for a long moment. The sun was fully up now, warm on the bench, warm on the dusty street. "I think," she said, "that I'm not ready to know yet. And I think that's all right." "It is," he said. And it was. The not knowing, the not rushing it, that was all right. They had time now, or the beginning of time, which was more than they'd had yesterday. The documents were intact. The dismissal was on record. The injunction was dead. McBride was not finished, but he was diminished. And diminished men made different calculations than confident ones. Drummond came out of the courthouse behind them with his hat back on, and his duster settled, and the particular air of a man who has completed the official portion of a difficult day. "Cheyenne," he said. "Tomorrow morning with an escort this time. Official." He looked at Wyatt. "Unless you're planning to argue about it." "No argument," Wyatt said. Drummond looked at Clara. "You did well today, Miss Harper." "We did well," she said. Drummond accepted that with a nod and went to find his horse. Holt appeared from down the street, looking like a man who had just made a decision he'd been avoiding. "I'm going back to Caldwell Creek," he said. He said it directly, standing in front of them, hat in hand. "I'm going to go back, and I'm going to do my job the way it's supposed to be done. And if McBride tries anything else through that office while I'm wearing this badge—" He stopped, his jaw set. "He's going to find that particular door closed." Clara looked at him. "That's going to cost you," she said. "Probably," he said. "But I've been thinking about what you said, about categories." He put his hat back on. "I'd like to stay in the second one." He touched his hat and walked to his horse. Clara watched him go. "He'll be all right," Wyatt said. "I know," she said. "He's made of better stuff than he thought he was." She looked down at the bag in her lap. "Most people are." She stood up from the bench. She straightened her dress with the efficiency of a woman who does not spend time on gestures but understands their value. She looked at Wyatt. "I'm going to need a room for the night," she said. "A real bed, and something that isn't beans." "There's a hotel on 3rd Street, he said. "The food is adequate." "Adequate sounds like a miracle right now." She picked up the bag and put it over her shoulder and looked down the street. Then she looked back at him, and the look had in it something that had not been there 5 days ago in Caldwell Creek. Not yet full warmth, not yet the unreserved thing, but the beginning of it. The first evidence of a door that had been shut for a long time, and was considering very carefully the possibility of opening. "Thank you," she said. "For the horse, for the cabin, for today. You did most of it yourself." "I know," she said, "but it matters that I didn't have to do all of it alone." She walked up the street toward 3rd, and he stood in the morning sun and watched her go. And somewhere on the other end of a telegraph wire, Silas McBride was reading the news from Laramie and recalculating, and the Attorney General's office in Cheyenne was opening a file with the Rafter M's name on it. And none of that was finished. But today was one. And that was enough for today. They left Laramie the next morning at 6, with Drummond's official escort, 2 federal riders ahead, 2 behind, and the kind of clear summer sky that felt almost like a promise the territory wasn't entitled to make. Clara rode beside Wyatt. Not behind him. Beside him. He noticed and said nothing, and adjusted his pace accordingly. The train to Cheyenne left Laramie at noon. They made the station with 40 minutes to spare, which Wyatt spent watching the platform and the street beyond it with the particular attention of a man who has learned that the hour after a victory is exactly when the careless thing happens. Drummond did the same from the other side of the platform. Neither of them discussed it. They both just did it, and Clara, who missed nothing, watched them both and understood. McBride's lawyer Prentice was not at the station. No Rafter M riders visible on the street. The telegraph office 2 doors down had its curtains drawn, which meant it was operating normally, which meant if McBride had sent a message ahead, it had not produced immediate results. Adequate, Wyatt thought. Not safe. Adequate. "You're still watching," Clara said quietly beside him. "Yes." "Do you think he'll try something before Cheyenne?" "I think he's deciding right now whether the cost has gotten too high," Wyatt said. The Attorney General referral changed his arithmetic. A man like McBride doesn't get where he is by fighting battles he's already lost. He gets there by knowing when to absorb a loss and reposition. He kept his eyes on the street. The question is whether he's arrived at that calculation yet. And if he hasn't, then we'll handle it. Clara was quiet for a moment, then, "You say that like it's simple." "It's not simple. It's just the next thing." He looked at her. "That's all it ever is. The next thing." She held his gaze. "Is that how you got through after Maggie?" The name in her mouth was careful and genuine, not used casually. He recognized the quality of it, the respect of someone who understood what it cost to say a dead person's name out loud to the person who loved them. "Yes," he said. "The next thing, and then the thing after that." A pause. "It's not a beautiful way to get through something, but it works." "It's the only way that does," she said. And something in her voice told him she was not speaking theoretically. The train arrived on schedule, and they boarded without incident, and Wyatt allowed himself for approximately 45 seconds to believe that the hardest part was over. He was wrong. They were an hour out of Laramie when Drummond came down the aisle from the forward car, with his jaw set in the way it set when information had arrived that he didn't like. He sat across from Wyatt and Clara without preamble. "McBride's in Cheyenne," he said. Clara went very still. "Since when?" Wyatt said. "Rode through the night apparently. He's been in Cheyenne since early this morning." Drummond set a telegram on the seat between them, sent from his contact at the Federal Land Office, received at the last station stop. "He's filed a new challenge, not through a county court this time, not through Prentice." He paused. "He found a federal land attorney, someone with actual standing." Wyatt read the telegram. Clara read it over his shoulder. The challenge was narrow. A technical argument about the 1881 filing date, and a procedural window in the original federal claim regulations. It was the kind of argument that a good federal attorney could make look legitimate for long enough to create delay, which was probably the point. McBride had abandoned the blunt instrument of the county court and picked up a scalpel. "Can he win on this?" Clara said. Her voice was flat and controlled. "No," Drummond said. "But he can create 6 months of procedural limbo if the challenge is allowed to stand." He looked at her directly. "Which is why we need you in front of the Land Office Registrar before close of business today. If your filing is confirmed and on record before his challenge is formally entered." "It supersedes it," Clara said. "It doesn't supersede it, but it changes the posture of the whole proceeding. Your claim is active and confirmed. His challenge is attacking a confirmed claim rather than an unconfirmed one. That's a much harder legal position for him." Drummond folded the telegram. "The land office closes at 5. The train arrives at 3:40. Wyatt looked at him. "What aren't you telling us?" Drummond's jaw did the thing again. "McBride requested a meeting with the registrar this afternoon. 2 o'clock. He looked at his watch. "He's there right now." Clara stood up from her seat. She stood in the aisle of the moving train with her bag across her body and her expression stripped down to its absolute foundation. No performance, no careful control, just the raw determined core of a woman who has fought for 8 months for a piece of ground. Her father died defending and is not finished yet. "Is there any way to get there faster?" she said. "No," Drummond said. "The train is the train." She looked at him, then at Wyatt. Then she sat back down. "All right," she said. "Then we plan. Tell me exactly what I need to say when I walk through that door." Drummond talked for 40 minutes. Clara listened in the way she listened to everything that mattered completely without interruption, asking precise questions at precise moments, and storing the answers somewhere behind her eyes where they would be available when she needed them. Wyatt listened too, and contributed 3 times each time with specific information about McBride's documented behavior that Drummond incorporated into the approach without comment. They worked like people who had been doing this together for years. That was the thing about the last 6 days. It had compressed time in a specific way, the way that pressure and motion and shared danger always did. He had known her for less than a week, and he knew her the way you know terrain you've covered in all weathers. At 3:15, Clara excused herself to the forward car to speak with Drummond's lead rider about the approach to the land office. Wyatt watched her go. Drummond watched him watch her. 7 years alone on that mountain, Drummond said. Don't. I'm not doing anything. I'm making an observation. Observe quietly. Drummond smiled brief the smile of a man who considers himself too professional for sentiment and is proven wrong approximately twice a year. He looked out the window. She remind you of her Maggie. Wyatt was quiet for the moment. No, he said honestly. Not at all. She's entirely herself. He paused. That's the thing. Drummond nodded. He said nothing else about it. Clara came back and sat down and opened her bag and went through the documents one final time, and the train carried them south toward Cheyenne and whatever Silas McBride had arranged to put in their way. The land office was on Capitol Avenue, a solid stone building that wore its federal authority without apology. Drummond's 2 forward riders went in first protocol, not drama, and Wyatt stayed beside Clara on the steps for the 10 seconds it took for them to confirm the room was clear. 10 seconds in which Clara said nothing and looked at the door with the expression of a woman who has arrived at the place she has been trying to reach for 8 months and is not going to let the arrival be less than it is. Ready, Wyatt said. I've been ready since February, she said. They went in. The registrar's office was a large room with federal maps on every wall and a long oak counter and 3 clerks who looked up when a woman in trail-worn canvas walked in, flanked by a federal agent and a man who had the general demeanor of someone who has recently prevented several things from going badly wrong. The registrar himself, a man named Fowler, compact and precise with the careful bearing of a civil servant who takes the concept seriously, came out from behind the counter when Drummond produced his credentials. Agent Drummond, Fowler said. I was told to expect you. He looked at Clara. Miss Harper. Mr. Fowler, Clara said. I understand you had a visitor this afternoon. I did, Fowler said. He did not elaborate immediately, which was the kind of restraint that could mean several things. McBride, Drummond said. Mr. McBride was here, yes, with his attorney. Fowler looked between them. I need to inform you that a formal challenge has been filed against the Harper mining claim registered under federal case number. We're aware of the challenge, Clara said. I'm here to confirm the original filing and submit the supporting affidavits. She put her bag on the counter and opened it. I have the original claim document, the 1881 filing receipt, and 3 supporting affidavits, one from a federal agent, one from a circuit court judge, and one from a territorial attorney general's investigator. She laid each document on the counter as she named it precisely without rushing. I'd also like to formally submit this. She produced one more document, the one Wyatt hadn't seen before, the one that was not in the sequence he'd observed her review a dozen times. Fowler picked it up. He read it. His expression changed in the specific way of a bureaucrat encountering something that reorganizes the significance of the morning he's just had. "This is a sworn statement," he said. "From Deputy Samuel Holt of Caldwell Creek," Clara said. "Attesting to direct observation of Silas McBride coordinating with Judge Whitmore of the county court prior to the issuance of the now dismissed court order." It also contains Deputy Holt's account of McBride's statement regarding the mining claim made in the presence of witnesses on the day of the auction. She met Fowler's eyes. "On the day McBride attempted to compel my labor in a public setting." Fowler looked at the statement. He looked at Drummond. He looked at Clara. "When did you get this?" Wyatt said quietly, close enough that only she could hear. "Holt gave it to me yesterday morning before he rode back to Caldwell Creek," she said, equally quiet. "He'd written it on the trail coming up the mountain. He just needed a witness signature." She glanced at him. "Drummond signed it on the platform in Laramie while you were watching the street." He looked at her. "You had this the whole time," he said. "I was waiting for the right moment," she said. "In front of a federal registrar, with everything else already on the counter, was the right moment." He looked at the counter at the spread of documents at Fowler, still reading the sworn statement, and he felt something that was not quite admiration, because admiration implied surprise, and he was past being surprised by her. It was something simpler and more complete than admiration. "Miss Harper," Fowler said. He set the statement down. "I'm going to ask you to wait while I consult with the senior registrar. This..." He looked at the documents. "This changes the context of the challenge filing considerably." "Take the time you need," Clara said. Fowler went through the door at the back. Clara stood at the counter. She put both hands flat on the oak and looked at the wall of federal maps and breathed. Wyatt stood beside her. "Holt," he said. "He needed to do something that mattered," she said. "I needed a signed sworn statement. It wasn't complicated." "You knew that on the mountain, when you told him about the second category." She was quiet for a moment. "I knew he wanted to be in it. I knew what being in it would require." She looked at the map directly in front of her Wyoming territory, hand-drawn the mountains in the north rendered in careful ink. "I didn't manipulate him. I saw what he was trying to become, and I gave him a door." "That's not nothing," Wyatt said. "No," she agreed. "It's not." Fowler was gone 14 minutes. Clara counted, though she would not have admitted it. Wyatt could tell by the way her breathing changed at the 12-minute mark. Not panic, just the body accounting for the passage of time. The door opened, and Fowler came back with a second man, older, heavier, with the unmistakable air of institutional authority, worn long enough to be entirely comfortable. The senior registrar. He was carrying the folder that Clara's documents had been gathered into, and he was carrying it with the specific care of someone who has decided it is important. "Miss Harper," the senior registrar said. "My name is Harold Vance. I've been with this office for 19 years. He set the folder on the counter. "I've reviewed your filing, the supporting documentation, the circuit court denial of the injunction, the federal dismissal of the county court order, and the sworn statement from Deputy Holt." He paused. Clara waited. "The challenge filed by Mr. McBride's attorney this afternoon," Vance said, "raises a procedural question about a 4-day window in the 1881 filing period. It's a technical argument, and it's not without precedent in form." He looked at her directly. "However, in light of the concurrent Attorney General referral and the sworn testimony regarding coordination between the original county court action and Mr. McBride's commercial interests, this office has an obligation to consider the broader context of the challenge." He folded his hands on the folder. "We are going to flag the McBride challenge for review by the Federal Land Commissioner in Washington. That process takes 60 to 90 days. During that time, the Harper claim remains active and uncontested." Clara's hands on the counter did not move. "And after the review," Drummond said, "the commissioner will make a determination. But I'll tell you plainly, a challenge flagged for coordination with a dismissed county court action and a judicial misconduct referral is a challenge that starts 60 days behind. Vance looked at Clara. Miss Harper, your father filed this claim legally and correctly. You have maintained it legally and correctly. This office sees no basis to treat it otherwise. The room was very quiet. Clara took her hands off the counter. She put them at her sides. She looked at Harold Vance with the direct, unguarded gaze of a woman who has been fighting for 8 months in the park and has just for the first time felt the ground under her feet become solid. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady. It was steady in the way that things are steady when they are made of something that cannot be moved. Vance nodded. He slid the folder back across the counter. Her documents, her claim, all of it confirmed and recorded. "We'll need you back tomorrow morning for the formal confirmation signatures, 9 o'clock. "I'll be here," she said. She picked up the folder. She held it against her chest with both hands, the way she'd held the bag in the courthouse in Laramie, and she turned around. Drummond was expressionless in the professional way, which meant he was pleased. His 2 riders were standing at parade rest near the door. Wyatt was standing 3 feet behind her where he'd been the whole time. She looked at him, and then Clara Harper, who had not cried once in 6 days of auction platforms and mountain ambushes and injunctions and hard riding in federal courtrooms, who had not cried when they'd cut the rope from her wrists, had not cried at the campfire, talking about her father, had not cried on the bench in Laramie in the morning sun, put one hand over her mouth, and her eyes went bright, and she breathed through it hard for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds. Then she took her hand down and straightened her spine and looked at Wyatt with red eyes and a jaw like iron. "Don't say anything sentimental," she said. "I wasn't going to," he said. "Good. I was going to say we should find somewhere to eat. You haven't had a real meal in 2 days." She looked at him for a moment. Then something broke open in her face. Not grief, not relief, but something that lived in the same territory as both the specific expression of a person who has been serious for so long that the first real moment of ordinary life lands like a physical thing. She laughed. A real one. Short and sharp and entirely genuine. "All right," she said. "Yes, let's do that." Kij. They found a restaurant on the main street. The kind that had tablecloths and real silverware, and a menu written on a chalkboard. The kind that felt almost aggressively civilized after 6 days of trail coffee and campfire beans. Drummond joined them. His 2 riders ate at the counter. The food was good. Clara ate with the same uncomplicated hunger she'd brought to every meal on the trail, and at some point during the second course, she stopped holding the folder and put it on the chair beside her, which was the first time in Wyatt's observation that the documents had been out of her immediate physical possession since she'd laid them on the counter at Fowler's. She was letting herself be here, in this room at this table with food and light and the ordinary noise of a restaurant on a Tuesday evening. Drummond asked about the Harper claim, the practical questions, the gold, the equipment that would be needed to work it properly, the timeline. Clara answered in the precise, knowledgeable way of someone who had thought about these things for a long time, and was now for the first time allowed to think about them as real rather than theoretical. Wyatt listened and watched her talk and thought about the 8 miles between his cabin and the North Fork of Crow Creek. After Drummond excused himself to send telegrams, Clara and Wyatt sat across from each other with coffee and the particular quiet of 2 people who have run very hard for a long time and have arrived somewhere they didn't entirely plan for. "What happens now?" Clara said. It was the same question she'd asked him on the mountain the first night across the campfire. The same words. A completely different weight. "You come back tomorrow," he said. "You sign the confirmation. The claim is officially active and on record." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Then you figure out what you want to do with it." "I know what I want to do with it," she said immediately. "Work it, properly. Get the equipment, hire the hands, work the seam my father found." Her hands were flat on the table. "It's going to take capital I don't have yet. I'll need investors or a bank loan, and a bank loan means I need to not be in active litigation. The flag on McBride's challenge protects you from active litigation for 60 to 90 days, Wyatt said. "That's enough time to approach a bank if you have the documentation, which I'll have tomorrow morning." She looked at him. You know a lot about mining claims and federal land law for a freight runner. I know a lot of things for a freight runner. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because Maggie was going to be a school teacher. She read everything she could get hold of, and she talked about everything she read. He looked at the table. I listened. For 6 years I listened. A pause. Turns out listening is a decent education. Clara was quiet. The restaurant moved around them. Other conversations, other lives. The comfortable noise of ordinary people in an ordinary evening. I want to ask you something, she said. All right. The cabin is 8 miles from the North Fork. He looked at her. I saw it on the map, she said simply. The first night. She held his gaze. I'm going to need a base of operations that's close to the claim. A place I can work from while I set up the equipment and hire hands and deal with whatever McBride tries next. She paused. I'm going to need someone who knows the terrain and knows the law and is not... She stopped. Started again more carefully. Is not the kind of man who puts conditions on things. The word conditions. She'd used it before. In the cabin at the end of the first day. I know the difference between needing help and needing rescuing, she said. I've been clear about that. You have. So I'm asking for the first thing, not the second. She met his eyes. Can I use the cabin as a base of operations while I work the claim? He looked at her. At the directness of her, the complete absence of performance or manipulation, the simple honest request of a woman who knew exactly what she was asking for, and exactly what she was not asking for, and was not going to blur the two to make it easier. Yes, he said. She nodded once. Business concluded. Then she looked down at her coffee, and something in the set of her shoulders shifted the very last of the formal distance, the final millimeter of the careful perimeter she'd maintained for 6 days adjusting. There is one other thing, she said. She did not look up immediately. Yes, I told you that the thing below losing the land was trusting wrong. She looked up. I've been thinking about that, about what it means in terms of expanding limits. She held his gaze without wavering, which cost her something he could see it. I'm not saying I'm there. I'm saying the calculation is changing. Wyatt was very still. I'm not in a hurry, he said. I know you're not. That's part of why the calculation is changing. She picked up her coffee. I just wanted to say it out loud, so it was said. All right, he said. It's said. She drank her coffee. He drank his. Outside on Capitol Avenue, Cheyenne went about its evening entirely unaware that a woman at a table in a restaurant on the main street had just laid claim to a piece of ground her father died for, and was quietly doing the arithmetic on something else entirely. Something that lived in a completely different country from mining claims and federal court challenges. Something that moved more slowly and demanded more care, and was, if it grew into what it had the shape of becoming, worth considerably more than gold. The next morning arrived with the same indifferent clarity as every morning in Wyoming summer. Clara was up and ready before Wyatt finished his first cup of coffee in the hotel lobby, which he had expected. She was wearing the same canvas dress clean, now she'd washed it the night before, and it had dried in the summer air, and her hair was properly pinned, and she had the folder under her arm, and an expression of focused readiness that belonged entirely to a woman walking into the final official act of 8 months of fighting. Drummond met them on the steps of the land office at 5 minutes to 9. McBride left Cheyenne last night, he said. His attorney filed a notice of intent to appeal the flagging decision, which is his right. It'll go to the commissioner's office in Washington along with everything else. He looked at Clara. It doesn't affect today. I know, she said. She looked at the door. Is McBride done? Drummond was quiet for a moment, the honesty of a man who doesn't make promises he can't keep. He's not done, he said. But he's running out of terrain. Every move he makes now is documented, referred, and on record with offices that don't answer to Wyoming territory politics. He paused. A man like McBride survives by operating in the space between what's legal and what gets noticed. That space is much smaller for him today than it was a week ago. Clara absorbed this. So we watch. So we watch. Drummond agreed. And we document. And the next time he moves, we're ready. She nodded. She looked at Wyatt. He looked back. Let's go sign some papers, she said. The confirmation took 45 minutes. Vance was precise and thorough, and Clara matched him beat for beat, initialing every page, answering every question in the flat, accurate language of someone who has learned that the difference between winning and losing often lives in a single, incorrectly completed form. When it was done, Vance stamped the confirmation document with the Federal Land Office seal and handed it across the counter. Clara took it. She looked at it for a long moment, at the seal, at her name, at her father's name, in the original filing date, at the legal language that translated to "This is yours. It was always yours." And now the record says so in a language that cannot be quietly ignored or corruptly undone. She folded it along clean, new creases and put it in the folder with everything else. Thomas Harper filed this claim, she said to Vance, not for any legal reason, just to say it. He came from Ohio in 1871. He found color in that creek in 1878. He did everything right. Vance looked at her, the 19-year civil servant, the careful bureaucrat. The record reflects that, he said quietly. Good, she said. I wanted to make sure. She turned from the counter and walked out of the land office into the summer morning, and Wyatt was there, and Drummond was there, and the street was the street, and the sky was the sky, and the folder under her arm contained everything her father had built, and she had fought to keep. She stood on the steps and breathed. Drummond shook her hand formally, genuinely. He shook Wyatt's. He said the official things about ongoing contact and the Attorney General's process and the 60-day window. Then he put on his hat and walked to his horse, and the two federal riders fell in behind him, and the official portion of this was finished. Wyatt and Clara stood on the steps alone. Train back to Laramie leaves at noon, he said. I know. We have 3 hours. She looked at the street, at Cheyenne going about its morning. She looked like a woman taking stock of something, doing a full and honest inventory of where she stood and what she had and what came next. There's something I want to do first, she said. What? I want to go to the telegraph office, she said. I want to send a telegram to Caldwell Creek. To who? She looked at him. To everyone, she said simply. To every person who stood on that street and watched and said nothing. To the women who pulled their children close and didn't move. To the men who looked away. She held the folder. I want them to know that Thomas Harper's daughter went to the Federal Land Office in Cheyenne and confirmed her claim, and it's on record, and McBride's challenge has been referred to Washington, and the Attorney General is investigating. She paused. I want them to know what happened when one person decided not to be silent. Wyatt looked at her. Not for revenge, she said. Not to embarrass anyone. But because the next time McBride does this to someone, and there will be a next time with someone else somewhere, I want there to be people in Caldwell Creek who remember that it didn't work, that it cannot work. Her jaw was steady. Information is the thing, Wyatt. Information and record and witness. That's what beats men like McBride. Not force, not money. Just the truth put somewhere it can't be quietly buried. He thought about what she'd said on the mountain about her father. He doesn't talk about the kind of man he was. He just was it. All right, Wyatt said. The telegraph office is on the next block. They walked. She composed the telegram herself, standing at the counter, writing it out in the direct and economical language of a woman who had been thinking about what she wanted to say for a long time and knew exactly how to say it. She paid for it out of the same coin purse that still held the coach fare to Cheyenne she'd been saving before McBride moved against her. When it was sent, she stood at the counter for a moment. Then she turned around. One more, she said. She went back to the counter and wrote a second telegram, shorter. She folded the paper before she handed it to the clerk, and Wyatt didn't read it, which she noted with an expression that was almost a smile. Holt, she said. I told him it worked. They left the telegraph office and walked back up Capitol Avenue in the summer morning, and the folder was under her arm, and Wyatt was beside her, and neither of them was in a hurry for once, for the first time in 6 days. And the not hurrying had a quality to it that was entirely different from everything that had preceded it. At the corner where the street met the road that eventually led back north, back to Laramie and the train and the pass and the mountains and the cabin and the 8 miles to the North Fork of Crow Creek, Clara stopped. She looked north. "My father used to say," she said slowly, "that a piece of ground is just dirt until someone decides it matters. Then, it's everything." She was quiet for a moment. "He was talking about farming. But I think he meant something bigger." "He did," Wyatt said. She looked at him. The summer light was full on her face, and her eyes were dark and clear and entirely present. The folder was under her arm. The telegram was sent. The record was confirmed. Everything her father had built intact. Everything she had fought for standing. "Let's go home," she said. And in that single word home, something was settled between them that did not require elaboration or ceremony, that had arrived not through declaration, but through 6 days of hard writing and honest work, and the particular kind of trust that cannot be built any faster than the conditions of real life allow. They walked north. Behind them, in the federal land office on Capitol Avenue, a clerk filed the Harper confirmation in a ledger that would not be moved, altered, lost, or quietly forgotten. In Caldwell Creek, a telegraph machine was printing a message that 60 people would hear about before nightfall. In Washington, a file was opening with the name Rafter M across the top. And on the front steps of a land office 800 miles away, a man named Silas McBride was reading his attorney's letter, and finally for the first time doing the arithmetic that told him the ground under his feet was not what he had believed it to be. Some men learn that lesson and stop, some don't. But Clara Harper had made sure that wherever Silas McBride went from here, he went there, carrying the weight of a public record, a federal referral, and the knowledge that a woman in a canvas dress had walked into every room he'd tried to close and walked back out with what was hers. That was not nothing. That was in fact everything. And Wyatt Callahan rode north beside her through the Wyoming summer back toward the mountains that had always been honest with him, and understood for the first time in 4 years that the cabin he had built for one, and finished alone, was not the end of something. It was the beginning.